Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Jordan and today I'm here to give a book review of The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This was the book that I was most looking forward to reading in 2019 once I knew it was coming out, primarily because of the description. This cover, by the way, is gorgeous, but I went through a lot to try to get an advanced reading copy of this book, and I actually was able to. So I am so thankful, and I wanted to get this review out today because the book release is actually today to the general population of the general public, and I highly advocate that you pick up this book. This book was amazing. But before I get into the review, the general synopsis of this book is this is based on a reform school, a real reform school that was closed in 2011, that ran from 1901 until it was shut down. And essentially it was a school for boys. It was segregated and it carried out horrible atrocities and crimes. It was state funded. There were rapes, abuse, murders, all sorts of atrocities and abuse, child slavery. The list goes on and on. Anything you could imagine pretty much happened at this reform school. And essentially the book is based on that reform school, but of course the name has changed. But a lot of the events, as far as the bodies that were found, all this stuff, if you look up the actual reform school, the stuff ties out. So it primarily follows a main character, Elwood, who is a young boy who has his whole future ahead of him. He's bright, he loves books, he loves learning, and he's about to start college soon to take some college courses, and he's really excited. So you're kind of following his life and his excitement and dealing with the atrocities of the world and the racism in the world and how he's trying to combat that. Like, his biggest idol is Martin Luther King, and throughout the book, you hear some of his speeches and some of the lines and kind of Elwood's struggle on really believing in justice and what is right in this world will happen and prevail. So we're kind of following him on this journey when the unfortunate turn takes left where he ends up in this reform school. And that's kind of where the story really picks up, and you get introduced to a lot of the characters and a lot of the daily lives of what it was like within the reform school, as well as a friendship that he builds with another kid there, Turner, and hearing the backstories of that. The writing in this book is impeccable. I really am trying to understand what Colson Whitehead's writing style is, and I can't really figure out exactly what his writing style is, but I just know whatever he ends up writing ends up being good. I feel like, this is the third book by him that I've read, but I feel like every book that I read, it gets better and better. This style was different from the Underground Railroad, but it was amazing. I loved how the story weaved in and out throughout different phases and just different events that happened in Elwood's life, and how it kind of travels throughout time. You're kind of trying to piece the story together, and you kind of have an idea of where the story is going, but you really don't. It was just really well written, and it kind of holds on tight where the book itself haunts you in a way where these characters become real, which they are. I guess essentially it is real. Based off of testimonials, a lot of the names that were used are the same. Like, one of the places where a lot of the physical beatings and abuse took place was called the White House. That is what is used within here. Black Beauty, which is the name of one of the belts that was used to beat the boys, that is also used within here. Some of the testimonials, like lines from their testimonials, are actually quoted within the book, which the writer himself references in the back of his book, along with different resources where you can learn more about this particular reform school. And just what is the most sad part about this is just one reform school. You know, when I'm looking at the dates of basically when this reform school, this particular one, was actually closed, it coincides with the time of when I was in college. And what's interestingly, I said that this was a little bit outside of Tallahassee. I went to school in Tallahassee in Florida. And a different reform school, not this one, that was not too far outside of Tallahassee as well, in Panama City, is where a young boy was murdered at a reform school, Martin Lee Anderson. You could also look up the information on that. That was something that was prevalent. It was pretty much like my first introduction into kind of like injustice and using your voice and trying to stand up for, injustice. And basically before his death, there were over 180 something complaints of abuse and mistreatment and all sorts of atrocities at that school, and nothing came of it. And after he died, still with marching protests, nothing came of it. And it's not saying it to discourage. I still feel using your voice and all that is so impactful, but it really hit home when reading with Elwood and his belief. It just reminded me so much of myself, like believing, like, you do this, you fight for justice, you do this, and you see the outcomes. And I feel like that situation that happened in that atrocity and that tragedy and seeing the outcome and how that played out, it took some of that belief that things will work out and justice does prevail away from me when I was younger. But it still has that fire where you want to fight for what is right, but kind of that dose of reality of the world that we currently live in. So this one definitely hit home a lot. Along with that, it was just, I feel like, something that I've never read about. This is not something that's discussed or talked about. A lot of times when people are away at reform schools or in prisons or wherever they are, that is outside of normal society. But a lot of these atrocities, all of these atrocities essentially, especially when it comes to reform schools or juvenile detention centers, prisons, all that, those are state funded. And the abuse that are happening to our children, to little kids, it's shameful. And this isn't just something that happens in the past. This is something that is currently happening. This novel, I highly recommend reading this book. This is a book that deserves a deeper dive, but in order to do that, spoilers will have to be discussed, which I cannot do in this review. So this book review is more so as to encourage you to read this, and I will have a deeper dive discussion actually with Dwayne for Left on Red podcast, which will also be on my vlog on this channel. So stay tuned for that. So this is just to give you a heads up to encourage you to read this. So once we have that video, you will also have read this book and we can all have a discussion and talk about it. And I know a lot of people have been asking me, give a heads up on these books so we can chime in on the discussion. Well, this is one that I would like that to happen. So definitely, if you're interested, read The Nickel Boys. You will not be disappointed. You may not rate it 5 stars like I did, but I have a hard time believing someone would not think this was amazing writing or an amazing story. So that's pretty much all I have. I love this book. Had I read it a little bit sooner, that top 10 that I just did, this would have definitely been on it. I wouldn't change anything about this book. Until the next one, love and light, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.